Welcome to the Brave Journey Within with Jim and Jenn. This show is about the spiritual journey and all of the challenges, healing, wisdom, and consciousness expansion experienced along the way.
Welcome to an all-new episode of Brave Journey Within. I'm Jim and this is Jen, and today's episode is on why we suffer. And since we all know about suffering, Jen, what made you pick this topic today?
I've been hearing a lot of people talking about the last few years, myself included, and there has been a lot of suffering in the world. I think, as a spiritual person processing things that have happened over the last few years in our world, it just hasn't really been easy. And a lot of us, there's a suffering that I think we tend to cling to at times. And I wanted to talk about the idea of suffering and what purpose it might serve, and to have people walk away from this conversation with a bigger understanding of why we suffer or struggle and what we can do to turn it around.
Yeah. Um, why don't we, I'm trying to think of like a good place to start. One of the I want to give a shout out to Dr. Wendy Hill. She has some really interesting life lessons on these things. Um, but why we suffer is one of them, and it's one of the beginning ones, right? Because any seeker is going to start to pay attention to, like, okay, why am I dealing with these particular challenges? And one of the things that she says is that it's just a path of becoming, or on this path of supposed enlightenment
Hmm.
or awakening, maybe is how I would put it. Would you characterize it in that way, or would you change that at all, Jen?
I would, but I look at it as a motivator. I don't think any of us really like to suffer, although we often choose suffering because we don't know better. I think the idea of the challenge, I prefer to think of it as a challenge, rather than suffering, because suffering makes it seem like it's so out of your control and that there's nothing you can do in this experience to resolve it. Does that make sense? Suffering, to me, the idea of that word, it puts me into a state of, I'm just kind of a victim to the circumstances.
So reframing it,
I like to feel empowered if I can.
I agree. Yeah,
But it's
that's
not
what.
to take away from someone's experience, because there are times in my life I've definitely felt like I've suffered. And the only way, though, I got out of it was to find my way to empowerment. And to me, the idea of suffering and pain, it's a strong motivator to get us into the state of alignment we need to be in to move forward in something. Um,
Well, I would say a lot of times, if there was no pain, there would be no catalyst for growth.
exactly. And what often comes through in my channeling work is that the bigger the catalyst, the further the catapult. So the more of a struggle it is, the further we can move forward in an experience.
Yeah, it can propel you into greater things.
So, like, a really good example might be if someone has a health issue and they're just kind of ignoring it. Maybe they have, I don't know, reflux, or something that it's livable. It's something you can work around, or work with, but your body is still trying to tell you something's going on and something's wrong. But maybe we'll take some medications or something to try to quell the response of the body and move forward in life, in our normal way. We don't change at all. And then the body starts creating more suffering. It starts creating a stronger signal, a stronger message that something's out of alignment. And what happens is it gets stronger and stronger and stronger until we decide that, okay, the suffering is too great for me to continue this way. So maybe then, there's a diet change, or something, right? And maybe you're going more for the root of this situation to try to heal that, to stop the suffering because it's too painful.
Yeah. So
Um,
what Dr. Hill would say is, don't fight the pain, acknowledge it, because your body or whatever is trying to tell you something.
right. Yeah.
So you have that this concept of, tuning into the pain, being curious about it, because that's where the light enters, basically.
And I would
the
say don't
answers.
ignore it either, right? Sometimes we fight it, sometimes we ignore it. Um, I think everything is a signal to go deeper within, right? So, whatever the pain or suffering may be, whether it's physical, emotional, or mental, even, or spiritual, I've seen spiritual suffering as well. So, whatever that is, I think it's important to dive into it as best as you can with whatever support you need along the way to really address it. And I think what's important too is as we're talking about the idea of suffering, to realize that a lot of our own suffering is caused by our thoughts and beliefs. It's not
Oh,
even about the circumstance, right? So so a lot of our suffering is totally unnecessary, and it's all in the way we're thinking about something.
man, I wish I would have talked to you a long time ago.
Oh yeah, I know, right? Yeah, me too. Yeah. Um, but we get so stuck in our own unconscious and subconscious beliefs that we don't even realize what we're thinking, which I think you can speak a lot to, being that that's your domain. You like to get into that space with the hypnotherapy and the regression work to get those unconscious beliefs more into that light, into that awareness, so that it can be addressed. So
Well, yeah, bringing awareness to that, what those beliefs are, how our thoughts are impacting us. A lot of the pain I've ever experienced was self-inflicted.
yeah, me too.
So if I'm looking to blame somebody, which is a common reaction we have when things don't go our way, it's like, okay, I gotta look in the mirror.
Yeah, I think we all do, though. I'd say the vast majority of the pain we go through is just from our unhealed wounds and our self talk and just our belief system.
And maybe karma too.
Yeah, I do. So it's interesting that you say that, because there are certain spiritual belief systems where they feel that suffering is a way to burn through karma. And like even I think we talked about it in a previous episode, where when they're dying, um, they actually embrace even painful or long stretches of illness towards death, because that suffering clears up karma. And so when you get into the talk about karma, it's just interesting, because karma is not necessarily a good or a bad. It can be both, and it's more of a balancing of the energy. um, but I think
Is
there's a
it
way we can.
is
I
there
I
something to, like, karma doesn't necessarily care about your feelings, like it's
Yeah. Right, I know.
cause and effect, it's just a natural order of things.
Yeah, I totally agree
Not
with
so
that.
much what you believe in or not, like,
Yeah. But I also think that we can utilize the so-called suffering, or whatever we want to call that challenge in life. We can utilize that to really dive deeper and ask ourselves those hard questions. Is there karma that we're correcting through this struggle? Is there, some way that we can figure out what that karma is and write it more quickly or balance it more quickly? Is there a way that we can move through something without the suffering? Maybe, so I feel like when someone is going through that period of just WTF, like what's going on? Why are we
yeah.
going through this? I do all the right things, darn it. God, why are you doing this to me? Universe,
Well,
what happened?
how
Right?
I'm curious, when you're trying to figure out if it's karma related, where would you start?
Well, I go within and I can get information myself, right? I'm pretty intuitive. I can get that kind of information usually. Sometimes I have blind spots. I think we all do.
Can
But if
you
you
maybe
don't
explain
have,
that process?
what's that?
Can you maybe explain that process?
Well, I'm able to connect with my guides usually pretty clearly. So I will go in and ask specifically, is this karmic or not? Or I might go into the courts of heaven and ask if it's karmic to please help clear the karma in whatever way we can. Or is there
So
a lesson?
asking for
Mhm.
a yes or a no.
So, what I find with karma, not always, but a lot of times, you can, through just acknowledgement of what you did and asking for it to be balanced in a way where you have forgiven or you've asked for forgiveness. It's all around forgiveness. That forgiveness balances, I think, most, if not all, karma. So when you really truly get into the space of forgiving all who may have done something to you and forgiving others or asking for forgiveness from others for anything that you may have done with them, balancing that energy so there's no charge to it anymore, I find a lot of times clears karma.
Okay,
Um,
so that is very pivotal. I actually learned about this from your son, Jacob, who taught me the meditation of the violet flame.
ah,
And so I was working with him, and he was like, you can transmute all these things. I'm like, what does transmutation mean?
yeah, right.
But the meditation is, basically imagining yourself being surrounded by this beautiful violet flame and it purges, feelings of fear or whatever you're holding on, right? So for me, it might be anger or self-loathing, um, shame, guilt, whatever. But it's the intention to let go of that and then also to forgive myself and then to forgive others that may have hurt me. And so it's very intentional. So it's interesting to hear you say that, but that's good, I think, for people to hear.
Yeah, and I think my understanding of it is we don't always need to know exactly what happened in a past life. Like if it's past life related, we don't always need to know exactly what it is. Sometimes we do, it seems. But a good way to know what kind of karma you're working through is to look at what's happening in your life. And so if you've got people abandoning you, well, maybe you've got some karma around abandonment. It might be wounding, it might just be past trauma that's trying to come up to be rehealed. But it's like, if in doubt, go to karma, because a lot of times it is about the karma. And if you can really truly forgive those who have wronged you, who maybe abandoned you or stole from you or stabbed you in the back, whatever it is, right? Whatever it is someone has done that's bothering you in some way, that's your trigger. And to me, the trigger is the key to understanding what you need to heal within you. And like you said, it's not about what's going on outside of you or who did what to you. It's about what you need to balance or heal or clear on the inside of you. And the universe is trying to show you that piece of you through the external. But if you can understand that and not, realize it's that person who stabbed you in the back or abandoned you didn't do that really to harm you. They did it to show you. So if you can understand that it's actually happening to show you what you need to work on instead of focusing your attention on what they did, then all of a sudden forgiveness kind of happens naturally. It's like a natural part of that process. You no longer will fear that trigger of what that person did. You'll be able to think about it and not feel the emotion that you used to have with it. And so a trigger would be anything that makes you feel sad or angry or fearful, anything like that. Um,
Yeah, I think I agree with what you're saying. Is you look around your current life almost like a detective, right? And like, where are things maybe not in flow, or where am I hitting roadblocks or challenges or things that are making me feel a certain way? So tuning into the emotion of things that you're having, from a hypnotherapy standpoint, that's where we would look at, like, okay, what's a current day, like a present challenge that is impacting you? What is the emotion that's showing up for you? And then tracing that back to that's root. So that in meditation or vipassana, they would say, like, you're looking for your sankara, which is the root of your suffering. Is once you can find it, you can dissolve it with awareness.
yeah, I love that. Well, I'm curious, Jim, what are some of the things that you've experienced in your life where you were struggling with something for a long time and then you kind of figured it out? maybe it was karma, maybe it was, I don't know, a shift in your belief or understanding. What are some things that you've dealt with in your life where, as a real world example for people listening, that,
Wow, you're asking me to be very vulnerable here.
oh, I'm sorry, I can do it too if
No,
you
it's okay. Part of being a healer is recognizing that I've had wounds,
Mhm.
and so I found there's value, or people find there's value in hearing that. I know for my mentors and some of the best healers that I've ever come across, they've got pretty big wounds, which makes them really good at their job. Um, Love was a big one for me.
Mm.
So I kind of mentioned in my own work with Vipassana meditation. So you're going into your body and you're at like a cellular level, starting to see what is giving you problems. And so for me, there was like a spot on my back, for example, and I was in excruciating pain trying to meditate, and the practice is to tune into that, to tune into your pain and see if you can find what's at the root of that. And when I did that, I noticed that there was a lot of anger,
Mhm.
and that anger was creating a lot of pain in my back. And the longer that I paid attention to it, I realized that there was um, one of the five hindrances in Buddhist psychology is one of them is self hatred, self loathing. And I wasn't happy in my life where I was. And so once I started to see that and to bring attention to that and to realize, like, okay, I'm not happy with where I'm at, but I can change that. And just by bringing awareness to that and tuning into that, all of a sudden my back pain went away. And so it literally dissolved because put a spotlight on it and I found it, right? Like, oh, there you are. That's what's going on. That's the issue. And
That's
so
beautiful.
you have your ability to do that. Now there's more to it, right? Because if you have self hatred, you have to figure out how to love yourself. That was harder to do, but, but that was the process of kind of learning and healing from that in that one aspect.
Yeah, that's beautiful. You're talking about self-love, which I think is at the root of a lot of the suffering. We don't have enough of it. So that's wonderful that you brought that up. It really is a process. I even find that with all the work I've done to really love myself and genuinely just really appreciate every aspect of me, there's still little pockets that I find sometimes as I go deeper and deeper where I'm like, oh wow, I didn't even realize that was still a thing. And here that thing is showing up a little bit here. And I feel like once as you move through the healing process, it's like you remove a lot of the big chunks. And it's an ever refining process. It's like you get to the smaller chunks and then even more smaller chunks. And before you know it, you're getting to the smaller debris of the things that you didn't know was there. But
Yeah. And if I could just add, it went further than that because really there were other beliefs that I had, that life was supposed to be suffering. Like if I wanted to get
right.
into heaven, I was going to have to suffer and deal
Yes.
with pain. And then I stopped feeling pain. It was like, okay, well, I can have a high pain tolerance, just not feel it. And so I can do hard things. And that was a strength, I thought, until I realized it wasn't a strength.
I think most of us think that. I think most of us think that in order to be worthy, we need to suffer. And I think it's ingrained in us because I really do feel like we are here on a hero's journey. And if you ever watch a movie about a hero, they go through suffering and they come out on top and then they save the day, right? And most movies are built upon that storyline. And I think we're meant to be here for that process, but I think we suffer way more than we need to. And there's this lack of worthiness that I think most humans have. And I think that that core wound needs to be healed. So,
Well, yeah, I mean that's a big wound to heal from,
yeah.
but I would never have been able to start that process without being aware of it. Like and this is probably important for people to know. The first time I ever signed up for a Vipassana retreat, was talking myself into this, and then when the time came, I backed out of it. I was afraid,
Oh no.
and then when did I come back to it? Maybe a few months later. There was the next, you know, fall or something, and I'm like, I gotta do this. So like even to get to that point, to begin to like explore that was a process. Because it can be scary to face your stuff. It's not easy to look and peer into your pain. That was really hard to do. Absolutely worth it, by the way, but really hard to do. So this does take courage.
Yeah, but it's what we're here for.
Well, part of it, yeah, right? Like it's, oh, okay, like it feels good. Like I don't have to suffer. I can get rid of that belief.
Yeah. Well,
And then figuring out, what else is next. As you open up to what's the next thing, because there's always a next thing.
well, it's interesting. And, when I look at suffering, to me, it's because you're in a victim mindset, right? And we've talked about this. And it's not to say that victimizations don't happen. We are going to go through things, it's part of the process. But to be in that space of suffering is completely disempowering. And the way through that is to find your way to your own divine empowerment again. To really find your way into that space where you use that situation or that thing that's happening or those energies, you use it in your favor. You find a way to catapult. So, and I think about my son Jacob. That was one of my first experiences in working with a suffering that I had and transforming it into something for good. And he was on the autism spectrum, and it always just kind of felt like he was such a teacher for me with that. And anytime I would get into the victim mindset with it, where I would, the woe is us kind of, or poor Jacob or anything like that, he would get worse. His symptoms would get worse. If I would get empowered and feel inspired by it and just utilize that inspirational energy towards the betterment of our experience or to teach others, he started getting better. So just realizing that we have more power in situations than we realize. In fact, we have all the power, although it doesn't necessarily feel like that. But if we're out of alignment with that greater expansive state of love and that God or universe connection, if we're out of alignment with that, we're going to experience more suffering or challenge than we really need to.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. I mean, once you tap into that power reserve, you realize that no one can ever hurt you. But it's very easy to fall into that victim mentality. And there's also power in being a victim. And so, I mean, you don't have to look very far in society today to see where that is constantly popping up.
Yeah, I
But
call it the
people can
victim
be attached.
currency. Yeah,
What do you call it?
the victim currency.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's true. And I've done it before. Things happen and you use it to get attention, or instead of using it to really get into that divine state of empowerment and alignment, we use it, and it's very common. I think all of us do it, but we use it to get that comfort or that support or whatever it is. We use it to be weaker in our situation than we really need to be. And
Yeah. I think once you make the decision that or because this has happened to me too, realizing that I have a victim mentality with something and catching it. And then for me, it's usually getting pissed off at myself for being a victim. and then using that anger to like, all right, I'm getting out of this. I can't believe I caught myself doing this again.
Yeah, I know the first time this was, I read a book and I don't remember the name of the book, but it was when I had a lot of chronic health issues. And basically, I think the guy was Russian or something, but he had said something along the lines of basically, it's your own fault that you're sick, to make it short, simple, and sweet. And, uh, and I just felt like it was such a slap in the face because I'm like, well, I didn't choose to do this. And I remember I put the book down and I was really irritated. And I was like, why would anyone ever say that? 'Cause, ah. And then it kept nagging at me. I was like, okay, I'm just going to finish the book. So I finished the book and I just, even though I was irritated and I was very triggered by it for sure, but I started asking myself those tough questions like, well, how is this serving me? How is it serving me to be ill? And I realized I was using it as a currency,
Oh, yes. So
right?
you bring up, so Dr. Wendy Hill has a sort of prescription on how to deal with this, but one of them is when you become aware of it, making a non-negotiable to change your behavior, but it has to be sincere and
Yeah.
it has to come from you and your heart because you it's like you can't lie to yourself. You
Right.
can deceive other people, but you can't really lie to yourself. But the point that I want to bring up, that's one part. The second part is realizing that there's hidden benefits to your behavior. So if it happens to be a victim mentality, realizing like, okay, there is a currency here. I'm doing this. There's hidden benefits. So she uses the example of smoking,
Mhm.
like this rebellious thing, like you're not going to control me. I'm going to do what I want to do, even though, society's telling me not to do this anymore. Like there was an aspect of, there was a motivator behind that behavior.
Oh, yeah, it just brings up so much. There's like so many things, so many directions we can go in talking about this.
Well, so I guess I'll stick to the prescription. Like, so that making the non-negotiable, she says it's engendering a sincere desire to change your behavior, admit your limitations, your failures, and really like maybe a radical acceptance around that,
Yeah,
and then the desire to change, recognizing why you do things, so becoming aware of the hidden behaviors, or sorry, the benefits. Because most people, when I bring those up to people, they're like, no, I don't have. There's no hidden benefit to drinking, or I don't know, whatever. Pick your poison.
there
But there
always
are.
is.
You wouldn't do it if it wasn't, right?
Right, right. And wouldn't be so hard to let go of because
Um,
it's filling a need. Yeah,
and then it's to start like, if you want to change, there's a reason. So start to see the reasons why you would. What are the positives to not smoking or binge drinking or whatever the behavior is that's creating the suffering in your life?
right.
Why would you want to eliminate those things, and what are the benefits? So starting to see the good, and seeing the good is a technique. It's not easy to do with our reptilian brains. We're all, always mired in the negative a lot of times. So it's a certain skill to be like, okay, if I quit drinking, I will feel better. I will sleep better. My relationships with people might improve. Those are not insignificant things.
Yeah,
Uh, I'm trying to think of the other ones. And then, oh, so this is the important thing too. There is healthy suffering and unhealthy suffering. Be clear, healthy suffering is worthwhile. So, going to the meditation retreat and being intentional about dealing with your pain is healthy suffering.
right.
Not going to the meditation retreat and drinking, thinking your problems are going to go away, is unhealthy suffering.
Well, and I want to make something clear too. As you're talking about the idea of healthy suffering, I think there's truth in that, but I also think that's where your thoughts around all of that is so important. Because if you're really in alignment with the higher expression or the higher understanding, the higher wisdom of what you're going through, there won't be that level of suffering. Even if you had something traumatic happen, you're going to come into more of a state of such deep love and awareness, even for that experience, that traumatic experience, that it's not going to feel as much suffering. Although, like you said, it is a process, but I'll definitely say, like, as I've deepened into my own spiritual practice and my own understanding and healing woundings that I've had, where when I suffer, it's usually because my thoughts around whatever it is, there's something out of alignment with it. Like the purpose of it or the extent of it, whatever happened, if I can get into that space of ownership around it, like, okay, this is really trying to show me something, and I'm going to put that experience just off to the side for a moment so that I can get my alignment right and really come at it from the highest space possible for wherever I'm at. When I do that, when I face the issue, my suffering is much less.
Two things that come up for me when you say that are being curious
Hmm.
about it, neutral and non-judgmental.
Yeah, I
You
totally
know,
agree with that.
honor. Okay, life is trying to show me something. What is it?
Now, I want to say too, because what keeps popping into my mind is, sometimes people go through really horrific things, and it's very superficial to say, just don't be a victim, right? Because somebody really truly was horribly victimized in some way. That's where you can't just talk your way out of it, or you can't feel like, okay, if I just switch my point of view, right, I'll be able to see this differently and not suffer at all. You still have to walk through that pain, right, of what happened, but coming at it from a space of higher wisdom and higher understanding of, okay, maybe there's something, again, like the karma, maybe there's karma I'm balancing through this pain and suffering with this victimization. Or maybe there's a lesson. Or maybe, it could sometimes it's multifactorial, where maybe it's karma or it's setting you up to do something with your life. So I don't know, someone, like, let's go back to autism, right? I really strongly felt that there were environmental causes to my son's autism. And I don't really want to get too much into that, but I don't think if those environmental causes were out of the picture, I don't think he would have ended up in the state that he was. And but when I went into past life regression, what I was shown was it was supposed to happen. So, but I felt very victimized by that experience and felt like all of my control and empowerment was taken from me until I went into that past life regression and I realized, no, 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 this was setting us up, both of us, for what we needed to accomplish in this life. And it took me into a totally different direction because I was a computer programmer and I used a very different set of skills than I do now. And it got me into the idea of healing and spirituality. He thrusted me forward. So I was able to use that experience to really catapult into a totally different direction in a way that I was meant to. So, but at the time, I would have been really upset if someone said, oh, you're using your victimhood as a currency, which I probably was, and definitely wanted people to feel sorry for us because we were victims to a situation, and I had a lot of anger around all of that, and but it was part of what I had to work through because beyond that trauma and that anger or the fear that I was experiencing, there's so much love and beauty, and it's like you do have to walk that to get to it sometimes. But
Yeah,
that that suffering is serving as that catalyst and we need to walk through it. And I think where most people go wrong with it is they ignore it or they just sit in it. They don't use it.
I mean, there is power in forgiveness. There's a number of examples. There was a woman from Rwanda a few years ago that came to the University of Maryland, and her family had been massacred. And she was one of the most joyful people. She eventually like forgave the family who were her neighbors that killed her family.
Wow. Yeah.
And she shared this message, and it was genuine. That's rare air. I've definitely had experiences where I've wanted to forgive someone. And if you've ever tried to forgive someone, you'll find that it is not easy. You might have to stick with it for a while till you actually till you get there. Doesn't mean it's not worthwhile or worth your effort. Um, but Dr. Wendy will often say, "From the ashes of your despair arises the phoenix of your
Hmm.
truth and joy." So if you are willing to go do some work, you will experience. You give yourself the opportunity to experience joy.
I think that's beautiful. I love that.
Dr. Wendy's beautiful too. She's been a great teacher and mentor to me.
That's excellent. Well, I think that's a great way to end this conversation is just, embrace your challenges and utilize them to really catapult forward and don't sit in it. Really dive in and look at it. Do the work, do the healing.
Don't be afraid of pain.
Yeah,
That's a really hard thing to learn, especially even just for athletes learning about how to work with their bodies. Is tuning into your pain is more effective than tuning out, distracting yourself. But you'll find growth in looking into it.
beautiful.
But
Well,
yeah,
thank you, Jim. And thank you, everybody, for hanging out with us.
yeah, and I'll share some of Dr. Wendy's stuff in the show description too, because I think she heavily influenced me in my life, and obviously this episode. And Jen, thank you for picking the topic. It was
Awesome.
great to dive into.
All right. Well, enjoy your day.
All right, bye.
We are so grateful that you joined us. Check out the description to learn more about us and also for additional resources to help you on your journey.